Hello, my name is Peterr Jesus, and I'm here with Dr. William J.L. Wallace, President Emeritus of West Virginia State College. I will be interviewing Dr. Wallace today about his involvement with the history of Camp Washington-Carver. Camp Washington-Carver was operated as a 4-H camp by West Virginia State College from 1942 to 1979. Presently, the camp is operated by the West Virginia Department of Culture and History and functions as a cultural arts center. This interview is taking place on November 15th, 1988, at the Educational Network on the campus of West Virginia State College. Dr. Wallace, to begin this interview, will you fill us in on your life before you came to West Virginia and how fate brought you to West Virginia State and West Virginia State College?
You're asking me to tell a long story, but I'll try to be brief. I was born in Salisbury, North Carolina in the year 1908. My father was an instructor at Livingstone College, our church school in Salisbury at that time. In 1912, the family moved eventually to East St. Louis, Illinois, where he was to start a Western Star of Zion, that is the Western edition of our church newspaper, and also to become pastor of the AME Zion Church there. So we spent from 1912 to 1922 in East St. Louis and in its schools. In 1922, my father was assigned to the AME Zion Church in Pittsburgh. And because of the fact that the schools were integrated, that Negroes and whites went to the same school, he was excited about that possibility because our experiences had always been in segregated institutions. I finished Allegheny High School in 1923 and then entered the University of Pittsburgh. I received my bachelor's degree in 1927 and immediately returned to Salisbury, where I taught at Livingstone College for over a period of 5 years. During that period, I earned my master's degree at Columbia University. Because of the very difficult economic times, it was necessary for me to leave my church private school and enter into a state, in the service of a state college, Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, for 1 year, where I taught chemistry there. While there, I heard of a vacancy at West Virginia State. I applied for it and came to West Virginia State College with an agreement with Dr. John W. Davis that I would stay for 2 years and then I would go off to graduate school. In 35, then I entered Cornell University, continued because I had registered in the summer at Cornell and taken some summer courses, where I spent 2 years and received my doctorate, a philosophy degree with major in chemistry in 1937. I returned to West Virginia State College at that time and pursued a career in teaching until 43, when I was asked to both teach and to become administrative assistant to the president, which position I held until 1950, when because of the drop in enrollments, the Board of Education felt that Dr. Davis didn't need an assistant, and consequently I lost that job, but continued my professorship. In the fall of 1952, October to be exact, Dr. Davis asked me for my permission that he would present my name to the Board of Education for the position of acting president, since he was going to take leave of absence. I readily agreed, and the board agreed, and I became acting president. Sometimes I think it was November 1, and then other times it December 1, I've forgotten. But anyway, in the spring, I was elected to the presidency of West Virginia State College to begin on June 1st, 1953. And over a period of some 20 years, then I was president until June the 30th of 1973 when I retired.
Right. Okay. Dr. Wallace, what was the social atmosphere like for blacks in the state of West Virginia when you came in the 30s, in the early 30s?
Well, West Virginia was one of the states where it was apparent that blacks and whites got along much better than in many of the states of our country. But there was separation, of course, separation in the schools. And because of separation in the schools, so many other activities were separated. For example, the Community Music Association did not permit Negro citizens to buy tickets for their concerts, and that perhaps took place, and I mean that was the policy until about 1954. So there was separation, but nevertheless there was encouragement for blacks to assume positions of leadership. For example, in McDowell County, there were tremendous interest in the political movements of the times, and many Negro office holders in that particular county. Yeah. So it varied, and it varied over the state in terms of the relationships between whites and blacks.
Well, let's get right to the camp now. When you began your career in 1933, Extension Agent James Banks, you remember him?
Yes.
And Dr. John W. Davis, president at that time, was beginning to push the idea for black 4-H camp. At what point did you become involved in this?
Well, I just knew about the activity. I couldn't very well become involved at that time because I was too busy establishing my own little niche in the Department of Chemistry. So actually, I did not become involved until 1942, and I remember the opening dedication of the camp. I attended that particular event, which was a considerable event because not only was it an outstanding event, but it was a tribute to Dr. Davis and to Mr. Banks for their accomplishment, and also to the governors who had preceded Governor Neely, and Governor Neely, of course,
Governor Holt,
and who were, let us say, gave their support to it. Right. And Governor Neely did dedicate the camp at that time.
Right. Okay, that was a question I was going to ask about that particular day. So you know, there was quite a few people there.
Yes, it was quite a large gathering, and that was indeed a indication of the support that the movement had gained at that time.
Right. How was the camp named? The legal name was always the West Virginia State 4-H camp.
Yeah.
Well, and initially Dr. Davis referred to it as the Booker T. Washington camp. But then later in a meeting that took place here on campus, George Washington-Carver was added, and it became the Washington-Carver camp. Do you know anything about how that name came about?
Well, the only thing I know is that, of course, Carver was well known at that time, and certainly the fame of his accomplishments had spread abroad, and the thought was that here were two outstanding persons who had contributed much to the development of the education of Negroes. You see, Washington, from the point of view of becoming skilled with one's hands to earn a living and to be able to support a family through the means that were available at that time. And Carver then, of course, was more interested in the development of scientific achievements and accomplishments, and certainly that lent a different sort of perspective to the whole thing, that the whole principle, that here was a camp that certainly was to teach young people the skills that would earn them places in the occupational world, and at the same time to direct their thinking to the fact that they needed to develop their reasoning powers and so on, and their scientific abilities. Farming, you see, is certainly agriculture is both work and skills. So there was the combination of those two points of view, which certainly are important. That is, the combination is important.
Right. Yeah. Do you know if did you visit the camp while it was being constructed?
No, I did not.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if any West Virginia State College staff or students worked on the construction of the camp?
No, I do not know. I don't think that was true. You see, the camp was built more or less by labor provided from the institutions, the prisons and so on. That is, from from the men who were accomplished and skilled and who could give of their labors in terms of the construction of that particular camp. And I think it was reported that they did have a coterie of very fine people who were very interested in and did a good job in terms of building that facility.
Right, the WPA and the CCC, and prison labor, and that seemed like it was a combination of different agencies. Mm-hmm.
Now, it's very possible that other members of the staff, for example, Mr. A.W. Curtis, Professor Curtis, who was director of agriculture at that time, and then there was interest in the work, all of the activities that surrounded the extension work were certainly interested in that, and I no doubt there were people from the college who did visit it and knew about it.
We have a film that was made in 1942. Now, I don't know if this was at the dedication or not, but we'd like to roll that film, and wouldn't mind if you comment some, if you wouldn't mind doing it. Okay. Could we see that film?
You want me to comment on?
Yes, please.
Oh, of course, that is the main cabin there, the big auditorium camp. The institution, of course, was the Negro 4-H camp, which involved all of the various activities which were then in the cooperative extension programs of the college. That particular building and auditorium is one of the largest that could be constructed or had been constructed of those materials, of logs and other materials there from the surrounding woodland, as I understand it. These are young people who certainly who are enjoying the facilities, and the camp received a tremendous support, and certainly enrollments were very appropriate for the various encampments and for the various programs. Young people, of course, were very prominent in their in the various programs, and as you see them there in recreational programs, all kinds of outdoor activities were involved as well as indoor activities, because the large auditorium was sufficient for even some indoor activities. And this was a great help for people, young people over the state of West Virginia, because long denied were these opportunities for performing the various skills and industry skills and activities that are involved in camping. So the recreational activities played an important role in in their experience here. Even some of the oldsters, as you noticed there, are involved in that. It was a tremendous addition to the facilities that were available for Negro students and young people at that time. There were some experiences that they had which they had never had before.
Right.
There was some novelty associated with it. That and is a beautiful area for these kinds of activities. And also for many other activities. The college here supported also various programs there for a time during my administration. I can comment upon those perhaps later in the program, but we did make use of the camp for recreation. Yeah. It's
Of course, the swimming pool was a favorite.
Oh yes, this actually was, one of the novelty
because up to that point there was no
programs.
public swimming pools for blacks in the state, was it?
I don't think that there were.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I know that near here there was a swimming pool, but the only time that Negroes were in that pool was at night when
they slipped in.
Yes, there were often stories about
right.
youngsters being certainly told to get out of the pool.
Over there. At one point, there was a 12-year-old arrested for climbing the fence and swimming in that pool.
In the pool, yes, that's right.
So that.
And
so this was like a mecca in a sense.
Yes, indeed, it was, and it was well attended. Church groups, and of course the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and all kinds of clubs and activities were conducted at the camp during the various periods of its existence. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course, the camp was very important to Dr. Davis. You remember any of his stories, or any high points about the camp with him? What was he like? Being involved with the camp, what was?
Dr. Davis was very proud of this accomplishment, and he often talked about the fact that one needed to be pioneering in spirit in terms of trying to develop programs that were necessary for the land grant particular portion of our program. Dr. Davis was outstanding in his participation in the land grant activities. He attended all of the national meetings of the Land Grant Association. He did not particularly like segregation, and consequently he did avoid in many instances the segregated aspects of it, but he would attend all of the meetings that were open to him, and I don't believe that he was much interested in a separate Negro group or black group as in the way, because he was very definitely opposed to segregation. Yes.
Mm-hmm. When Dr. Davis took leave of absence from West Virginia State College in December 1940, 52 I got here, to serve as the County Director of Technical Cooperation Administration Programs in the Republic of Liberia, you were appointed acting president, later president. Did John W. Davis leave you with a plan for the camp? Did he foresee integration when he left in 52? What would happen to the camp?
Well, I think that he saw it in the distance. You might say dimly in the distance. But his point of view here was that white students were welcome on this campus. The story goes that, and I've told this several times, that The Secretary of the Board of Education who was the chief communicator of the Board of Education with the college presidents under the Board of Education, was often disturbed by the fact that there were stories that there were white students on the campus of West Virginia State College. And when the gentleman, I won't name him at this point, but I think it would be evident, those who know the history of who that particular person was, would ask Dr. Davis about this. He would say, Dr. Davis, I understand that there's some white students on this campus, and that's against the law. And Dr. Davis would reply, well, Mr. Secretary, we have many colors in our race, and I can't tell whether there are whites or blacks on this campus.
Oh, that was good. Well, what was your plan then when you took over? For Camp Washington-Carver, what were your goals?
Well, of course, at first, we continued to make use of the camp for the cooperative extension programs. And those programs certainly filled the calendar of the camp. You see, there were mining encampments and home demonstration encampments and church encampments, and coming from many different sections of our society. So it was not necessary to give much thought to the programs then. As a matter of fact, I did not have much time for that because actually the college's existence was threatening. You see, we were short of students. We had started out in 1947 after the war with some 1,900 students. And when I looked at the files in December of 1952, I found that there were 793 students registered in this institution. And the drop had been tremendous each year, and I wondered what was going to happen for the next year. And actually, I thought at once perhaps not at all pushing for being the president of the college, which I didn't do anyway. But anyway, we didn't do very much except to confer with the various persons who were directing the programs, so that they would feel that we were intensely interested and would, of course, reflect the interest of the college and the point of view which we certainly had in terms of the development of programs that would point to further education of the young people who were involved in all of their various programs.
Right. Was Camp Washington-Carver used as a recruiting tool for the college? Did you get?
Very definitely. And certainly we were planning to use that to its utmost in 53, and we did use it. So, and as a matter of fact, for the enrollment in 1953, instead of showing a drop, we had a slight increase. We registered, and the records show 831 students. Not a large increase, but a shift in the trend from a rapid downhill direction to an upward direction, and I was very encouraged by that particular fact. And then it served as a source of what we call some community college programs. It was very interesting to me to see that many of our professors were interested in getting out into the state and providing short-term programs for people in subjects that were very practical. Income tax preparation, for example, and the execution of mortgages, all of the voting, how to vote, how to become registered, and what the implications were and what the importance was in terms of voting. Many practical problems. The miners, of course, in their problems within the communities in which they lived and so on, had many problems with regard to the education of their children, finding ways and means of making contacts to have opportunities for their children to go to school and so on. So we had a number of different programs. And it was a tribute to the people here, the professors who saw the need for this kind of thing and volunteered their services. They weren't paid extra for this. This was something they did on their own. And they'd go off into the fields there and spend 2 or 3 days, nights, for example, to cover a particular period. And then we had the cooperation of high school principals who would allow the use of their facilities for these various activities and so on. So Washington-Carver was a good center for those kinds of activities for the college, yes.
Okay. When you surrendered your land grant status in 1957, you still was sort of stuck with the camp. You know, 3 of the things you said when you surrendered the land grant, you would give up the demonstration farm in Lakin and the agriculture department and Camp Washington-Carver. Well, that didn't happen. You were still stuck with Carver. Did that put a financial burden on this?
We never did think in terms of giving up the camp. It was too valuable a facility that, as I viewed it. So that thought never entered. But the thought did enter that we needed to devise some programs to take the place of those that would be lost. And those programs could be found in the large number of young people who yet would not have available to them recreational outlets such as swimming we mentioned, and all of the kinds of activities that a camp can provide, as well as instruction in such as the Boy Scouts would give and the Girl Scouts would give in their various programs. And there were many other church groups and so on who could still make use of the camp. So I was not fearful of the loss of any reasoning there, or of any reasoning foundation for us to certainly maintain that particular camp. Then, of course, there had been some difficulties that had been developing, which pointed to the fact that we eventually were going to lose it as an activity anyway, because, for example, the mining encampment programs that were offered by Mr. Carter, I'll mention Mr. Carter, who was one of the key, U.G. Carter there, and his cohorts were then not appealing to the black miners. Those, even before the Supreme Court decisions, white miners were coming in and taking advantage of these programs in safety development, which I guess to some miners did not seem to be important, but which certainly grew in importance as mining leaders began to see that the company officials and these corporations should give more importance and stress on safety. Too many accidents in the mines and so on that could have been prevented. It was certainly discomforting to us to see that the Negro miners were not taking advantage of the possibilities here of the offerings. Now, then the number of farms in the state of West Virginia that were certainly in the ownership of blacks, being operated by blacks, was diminishing too. And so that the whole picture was rather drear in terms of future need and so on, you see. So I knew that we needed to develop some new programs for the camp, and we did develop programs that for a time were very popular for the campus here. And I can tell you about some of those.
Would you?
Yeah. For example, the Military Science Department could use that as a camp, preparing for their trip to the summer camps each year. And so that was good terrain up there for that kind of activity. And so the ROTC departments certainly did go up there on a number of occasions to conduct their preparation summer camps. And then we had student assemblies up there. We had student meetings, initial student meetings of the student leaders would go to the 4-H camp and discuss the programs for the coming year and so on. And those kinds of programs went over very well for quite a while into the new era, even following the Supreme Court decisions of 1954, as a matter of fact. And that camp then served as a good means of getting white students and black students together and working out some relationships. Often, it is pointed, the people point to the fact that West Virginia State College was integrated in such an easy manner, but it was easy in the sense that the outcomes were good and so on. But there was a lot of work that went into the development of that kind of spirit which permitted whites and blacks to mix on the campus and so on, and without too much friction. Of course, we had some problems in the early days, which was, of course, just to be anticipated and normal. But then we attempted to develop some small seminars, the students and faculty getting together there. Well, as a matter of fact, we had student-faculty relationships stressed in certain of the meetings, which created greater rapport between faculty and students. And this was particularly useful in terms of some of the more adult students who were interested in getting to know faculty in a more intimate way and to try to understand the differences in culture and responses to certain situations and so on. And I think that for a time that was a very important aspect of the use of the Washington-Carver camp.
A bill with your approval was introduced into the legislature on January 25th, 1961, and I quote, "To transfer operations of Washington-Carver Camp in Fayette County from the State Board of Education and West Virginia State College to West Virginia University." Can you comment on how that came about?
You say that I was mentioned as having...
approved, yes, according to... that could be wrong, of course.
I don't remember having...
Do you remember that particular...
having done that. No, I don't recall.
Okay,
I don't recall having ever supported that particular recommendation.
Kind of okay, good.
No.
Okay, I'll go on to the next question. Although Camp Washington-Carver was operated by West Virginia State College, during the early years, it was accountable to the Negro Board of Education, the White Board of Education, and the Board of Control. Mm-hmm. What kind of problems did this present, having so many people involved?
Well, that presented a good many difficulties for us here on the staff because early in my career here, for some reason, I was made a member of some of the important committees. For example, the Personnel Committee, which had to do with the ranking of professors and also with the matter of salaries of the staff and so on, particularly of teachers and professors. And we ran into some difficulties always, surprisingly, with the Negro Board of Education. This was a board of 3 members. I guess I shouldn't talk too much about it because one of the members is still living here.
I.J.K. Wells.
Well, I.J.K. Wells is one of them, yes, but right here in our little village of Institute, there's a professor. Later, he came to the staff as a professor, and I always kidded him about his reaction to high salaries, recommendations, when he was a member of the board. He was a high school principal. here in the state and was appointed to the Board of Education and then later came to the staff. But Dr. Davis had to present his recommendations first to the Negro Board of Education. And then they would go from there to the Board of Education. And the final decision was made by the Board of Education, which consisted of all whites. Right. That worked in a way very well. We got some support from the Negro Board of Education for certain of our programs. Now, note that this was in a period, well, it was a period from up till 47, because in 47, the Board of Education, as is now constituted, came into being, where the board was to consist of 9 members, one of whom had to be a Negro member. From then on, the situation was quite different. But the Board of Control had control of the finances of the institution. During my early period there, 33, I don't remember too much about that control because, as one of the professors related, at one time, I think it was in the 20s, around 25 or 26, the Board of Control had recommended that he be fired. And he raised the question about the fact that the Board of Control had no authority to fire him. And he appealed to the Board of Education and said, look, the Board of Control is trying to take over your function. Now, if anybody's going to fire me, it would be you, not the Board of Control. That was ironed out, and so that particular situation was certainly determined then that the Board of Control had no control. But there was another board, the Board of Public Works, and that consisted of the chief elected members of the governor and the treasurer and the auditor and other members of the board, of the elected group. And my first appearance before them was one that indicated the kind of support that I would get when one of the members of the board tried to make trouble by asking me to explain why it was that college professors got so much money for teaching only 15 hours a week, that sort of thing. And another member of the board said, now wait a minute, Mr. Sims, we have ironed this out time and time again, so that Dr. Wallace need not answer that question. So from that point on, they did not have too much to do with the immediate problems of. Now, of course, you had to get their approval for appropriations and that kind of financing and so on, and justification of programs and so on, which was normal in terms of a state-operated system of education, where all the people who were responsible for the various activities involved in the educational programs naturally would want to be consulted about certain of the programs that were proposed and so on, certain activities, building programs, and all the kinds of activities that are involved in a campus operation.
Okay, I just have a few more questions. During your presidency, you had 3 directors at Camp Washington-Carver. They were Wesley Lynch, John Jones, and Tom Childs. Can you comment on each of them? Qualifications, experience, the relationship with you as president?
All of these 3 were cooperative, some more than others. I don't want to specifically point out the failures or the accomplishments of each of them, but in general, we got along very well. We worked together, except that in one instance, and I won't name the person, we did not see eye to eye in terms of of the direction that in which we were going, and that direction had to do with the land grant status. Now, when I was asked my opinion about the land grant status, I expressed myself very frankly about it. We had 4 students, 4 or 5, I don't know, the number varies according to the person you talk to, but as I recall, the number was very small. Beginning in 1947, Dr. Davis had asked for more land. We had a very limited amount of land here for agriculture. All of what you see now as the vocational educational program there, the buildings that in that area, all of that land was available except for a small amount for the buildings of the West Virginia schools for the colored, deaf, and blind. Of course, in '54, when those schools were, the school was integrated with the one in Romney, then that land became available, and we tried to get it, I did, but at that time they had a very influential man and a very good program, let me say. The vocational education was extremely important. And his argument was a little more practical than mine in terms of meeting a need. Nothing was being done for handicapped people who could be trained to do jobs and so on. And it was only natural that they won out in terms of getting that particular land. So we had been using that land for agricultural purposes. We had a herd of cattle over there. And we had large gardens. Where we have a football stadium now was a big area for gardening and so on, growing experimental groups. We didn't need large tracts of land, but at least tracts to experiment with different kinds of corn and other vegetables and so on. We had a dairy herd, and but the loss of that land was a blow to the agricultural program. Then we did have land at Lakin, and we had an experimental station down there that Dr. Davis had secured. But that was 50 to 60 miles away, and very difficult. Just as the 4-H camp was so far away from the campus, it was difficult to really have programs that could be reached very conveniently. Then the number of students had dwindled to the point where we had very few students, particularly in agriculture. I had problems getting really people interested in agriculture. Now, the Supreme Court decisions was on the question of equal educational opportunity. And I could not see that we could offer educational programs or agricultural programs the equal of, or nearly the equal of WVU. We didn't have the demand in terms of number of students. We didn't have the farms to be taken over by these students and so on in the state, and interest in agriculture. So while I did not recommend that the land grant, certainly principle of the land grant operations be transferred, I left that as a kind of an option in my statement, which is recorded in the minutes of the Board of Education. And so that that option was taken by the Board of Education. Now, the land grant program supports other subjects other than just agriculture and dairying and home economics and so on. So the question is whether or not we would be given monies to replace the monies that we would lose through the land grant transfer, and we did. We got I would say, a very good deal out of that in terms of monies being given to us for the programs that needed to be certainly supported when we lost the land grant status. So in terms, I could not see the continuation of what we would call separate but equal. That simply did not impress me. When the students who would come here would be getting an inferior education to those who would go to WVU. And so it was just a question of what was in line with the principle of equality of educational opportunity. And that, I think, is the basic principle upon which certainly I acted. Now, of course, in states where there were large numbers of black citizens, that perhaps has not been achieved. And perhaps in those states they have achieved equal opportunities or facilities. So I don't know. I won't comment on that, or at least make a judgment. But in West Virginia, there was no need for a small agricultural or home economics or small home economics department at West Virginia State College, when all those marvelous opportunities were at WVU. And in addition, our purpose at that time, as I saw it, was in another direction. You see, and this was the convincing argument with the editor of the managing editor of the Charleston Gazette, who was proclaiming the fact that now that Negro students can go to all of these other colleges, we can abolish West Virginia State and Bluefield State. And my argument with him was that, one of the arguments was that the population was shifting in these directions. See, Carbide was really getting really good started here with all of its various operations and so on. People were moving, and not only here, but over into Putnam County and so on. So we were surrounded by older students who certainly would be yearning for collegiate experience. Now, Morris Harvey had done a tremendous job in terms of educating older students. And therefore, my argument was that we had a tremendous opportunity here of educating older students, who in turn would come to this campus and see what the opportunities were, see that West Virginia State College had earned the reputation of being, under Dr. Davis, an outstanding institution of higher education. We were accredited by the North Central Association in 1927, long before all of these other colleges, Concord, Tech, Shepherd, those institutions were normal schools. In 27, we were accredited by the North Central Association of Colleges and Universities. And while many of these other colleges were not. So we had the stamp of approval of our regional accrediting agency. And I proclaimed then that we have the longest continuing accreditation of any state-supported, and I think they've added 4-year college, and I would even include the university, because the university was accredited before we were, but they were kicked out for a year or so for athletic misdemeanors, you know. So that
you had the longest continuing.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
And therefore these people would come, and then the older students would come, and then they would see what was here and what the opportunities were, and would send their children here, and that's what has happened. So this college has won a role for itself. It didn't need to be a land-grant college to be acceptable. It has won its place in the state as a college for all the people here, and not only for here, but for people from other countries. And so we had an international community here, you see. And it's important in this day and time. I don't think there's any more important phase of education than to bring people from so many of our countries, because of all the conflicts over the world, together to meet on some common ground.
Right. Right. Okay, I would like to go back a little bit to the beginning of Camp Washington-Carver again. L.A. Tony, who was the state leader for the extension work, and I.J.K. Wells, who was state superintendent for colored schools, they were very involved with the camp. Can you comment on these two gentlemen?
Of course, L.A. Tony was outstanding in his ability to involve people over the state. He traveled around a great deal and did a tremendous, very effective job in his responsibilities as the director. I.J.K. Wells, of course, is a person who was interested in many community activities, and he was one of the members of the Negro Board of Education. And I don't mean to infer, when I stated
that he was
a while
the one.
back that the question of salaries was the most important aspect of their work, but they did establish an atmosphere for education among from Negroes or blacks, as we say today, in our state. I.J.K. Wells was newspaper supporter. Well, I think he edited and published a newspaper at one time.
Colors,
yes.
magazine Colors.
And he was a powerful influence. E.L. Powell was another member, but who was more interested in business. He was with Supreme Liberty Life Insurance Company and was an example of what could be done in terms of successful business. Of course, there were a number of others too in the area, but I'm speaking about people directly involved in education. Dr. Saunders, who was the director, well, he was the chief of we might say, the superintendent of Negro education in terms of the state, who was and a very influential person. They were key people in the early development of interest in education by young people in our state.
In our state.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You made a lot of requests to the Board of Education concerning Carver. For instance, I read in report after report where you would request money for freezers and kitchen space, and usually was always turned down on those building improvements up there. Could you comment on this?
Yeah, it was very difficult to get the Board of Education to see that the camp needed these kinds of facilities. Year after year, we did make recommendations. Our successes were not very great there, but we did manage to get enough to get by, we might say, with good camping programs. And well, one board member once remarked to me that, well, no, it's a camp. It's supposed to, you're not supposed to have all of these comforts of home,
right.
In a camp, you see. And so we were not too successful in that area. However, we did get along very well. I think that the main difficulty with the continued use of the camp, let us say beyond 65 or 6, was the fact that I could not get my faculty here interested in developing the programs that could be certainly usable at the camp. Distance was one, and then another was the fact that we did not have sufficient staff. It was difficult to keep up in terms of having enough faculty to cover the programs that were here on campus, as well as to take them to Camp Washington-Carver. The distance was in somewhat of
Distance was a problem.
Yeah.
Also, you stated in an interview that you did with Dr. Scobell that during the 60s, white schools began to hire blacks and blacks for teachers and administrative stuff. And this, of course, they reached into the pool of black schools and pulled out these people.
Yeah.
What effect did this have on Carver with the quality of personnel you had to work with?
Well, that I don't think that had much impact. I don't think that had much impact. As a matter of fact, I think that some of our white staff were much more interested in developing programs at Carver than were our Negro staff people. Mainly, I guess, because as you mentioned, that we were losing black staff, and consequently, the source, the pool of persons to do programs was dwindling. That is, among the blacks was dwindling. You see,
Right.
there. We continued to fight even to 73 to try to keep the camp, and when I left, we were still operating the camp.
Right.
But there's one thing, I had a number of conferences with my successor, but one thing that he did not discuss with me, and perhaps I didn't urge too much about the continuation of the Washington-Carver camp. I just thought that he would, being in agriculture and cooperative extension, that he would see the need for it, and not that I'm criticizing him, because certainly he had his views about how he was going to plan and operate the West Virginia State College, and there's always room for differences of opinion, but I think realizing the difficulties that we were having in 73 in maintaining usage of the camp, he may have decided that perhaps that the camp did not fit in with his programs. And so therefore there was a period in there in which there was kind of a hiatus in its use. Right. And certainly it was a welcome to me that the Department of Culture and History would take it over, because there was all kinds of proposals which would obliterate it as a camp, you know, but they came to the rescue there, and it has proved to be a very fine center for so many activities there.
Okay, Dr. Wallace, we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to cover that I didn't cover in these questions concerning the camp? You were proud of the student-faculty workshops.
Yes, very definitely. And I still think that even under its present management, that there would be opportunities for the college to take advantage of the. Oh, I didn't mention earlier the use of the camp for music camps.
Right, the music
Dr.
camp.
Leon Thompson, who was outstanding.
Right.
And we just didn't get music directors after that who were interested. But he pushed that tremendously, and he would take his students up there and weekends and other places and come out with some top bands. As a matter of fact, I think he was the top person in the development of the band here as an instrument of education, as well as of helping the school to in terms of its publicity and so on.
Well, I think our time's about up. I'd like to thank you for agreeing to come and share your opinions on Camp
Washington-Carver. Delighted to be here. I
Yeah.
hope that what I've said has been of some interest and help to you. I hope I have not made any mistakes in terms of recollections and so on. But it was an interesting part of my experience here, and I have some very fine memories of my work at the camp and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that concludes the interview. So I'd like to thank you and Connie and her staff and Fred Armstrong. And this tape will go down into the archives at the West Virginia Department of Culture and History. So it'll be available for anybody viewing that would like.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.